Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. I am your host and guide, Mr. Crispy, speaking to you through uncanny frequencies and sharing with you stories strange, fascinating, and terrifying. The views and opinions expressed on air are solely those of the speaker. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour is an entertainment program, and any similarities to any person living or dead, or any place or events, are entirely coincidental. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was created except as indicated by Matt Henshaw. Listener discretion is advised. And now, take Mr. Crispy's moldering hand in yours, ignore that tacky fluid under my nails, and join me for the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. Prequel. Perched upon her floating cathedra, Prima Queen Gecleart sensed the vibrations emanating from the shaved head of Eloweird, her advisor, carrying an emotion not dissimilar to concern. "Speak," the Prima Queen intoned, and Eloweird conveyed with semaphoric hand gestures, for Eloweird was born with no mouth, which some felt a blessing and others a curse. The Prima Queen understood, an entreaty from the Meteor for further sacrifice. Something important, sentient, more than lichen, but less than divine. She pondered a moment, considering options. The Prima Queen was loath to delay the request, knowing the Meteor impatient and prone to outbursts when not appeased. Mega Ani had passed since their last tantrum, which left the universe suspended in ice until the inevitable entropic thaw. The Prima Queen summoned her encyclopod, which skittered slipping across the glassy floor. A portal must be assembled, connecting the realm to a biofavorable plane in the tertiary strata. The encyclopod blinked understanding with its 3 eyes, and clicked its beak in rapid succession. A klaxon sounded, discordantly harmonizing with its overtone before ceasing. After a moment, penta-legged tardigrades came bearing the atomic building blocks, which they assembled per the encyclopod's waving tentacles, as though he were conducting a dozen simultaneous orchestras. Soon, the Prima Queen and Eloweird approached the structure to take measurements and tests. Temperatures were tallied, gravity weighed and counted, particle-to-wave ratios calculated. Satisfied, the Prima Queen commanded, "Commence." We would call the frame of the device wooden, even though it was constructed of atoms not at all carbon-based. Gilding the non-Euclidean corners were a series of rippling metal knobs which, when turned by the encyclopod, resolved the inside of the frame to a series of chaotic colors. The encyclopod made a series of rotations, causing the image to moire and burst into a new, wild set of subvisual photonic phenomena that left the air tasting of mildewed honey. More adjustments were made, and after several cycles, the portal was ready to accept its transmission. Eloweird was wheeled to the station, where they proceeded to ejaculate from their nails a greenish-red static. This flowed into the portal, where it then slowly bled, filling the aperture void. Eloweird signaled that the next phase could begin. The Prima Queen, exhausted from the effort, staggered out of the hall and entered her chamber. Here she removed the diadem and vestments, arranging them in her wardrobe along with her other clothing. She reclined on her settee and summoned one of the dozen faithful, faceless servants to bring refreshment. Moments passed, and then a rotund servant, standing about 1.5 meters in height, entered with a tray, stacked with gelatin, flatbreads, jellies, and smoked cheeses. Another followed with a vessel containing a steaming libation, distilled from the juice of the yucca cactus and seasoned with a variety of herbs. The Prima Queen dined, the servants standing out of eyesight but ready to move at a moment's notice. Thus contented, she indicated that the tray and leavings could be removed. They were, and the Prima Queen was alone again with her thoughts. Some time passed, and she grew tired. She went to her mattress, a brown polygon dented in the middle by her reclined form. She slid into the divot and soon passed out of consciousness. Soon her resting mind began to dream. She dreamt of phenomena that had no meaning to her. Hyenas, cackling madly while they rotted, teeth falling out of their head like rain. They accumulated into a small pile that attracted louse flies. These picked at the teeth and changed color from red to blue. One spoke, saying,
"Damnable smoking haunt, 7 domains ride the Space Lord until they are dead. Marquise baffles cosmogonic innuio, stain the mammon hand, and ergo blooms rancid with fiend. Reflections haunt the 5th domain, trembling disaster chains, birth tumult unto us."
It continued its babble. She considered the message, this sooth, carefully and filed it for reference when she was conscious again. As she dreamt, Illaweird entered the chamber and quietly crept to the bed. They gazed at the Prima Queen lying there, prone, knowing she was not entirely ignorant of their presence. Carefully, Illaweird began to pull from the Prima Queen's mind the threads of memory. This thread gathered, Illaweird then set to the work of making from the skein a woven record of the day's events, which would then be registered and kept in the archives. All interactions with the Matea Lord were recorded in this way, so as to ensure future generations of worshippers could have a most complete accounting of their caprice and commands. An eon passed, during which the encyclopod dissolved into hyperplasm after the tardigrades prepared the chamber with a flat altar, high windows, and a moat of hyper-intelligent moss. Illaweird perished a century after the device was first enabled. In their wake, Illaweird's spiritual energetic state evolved, taking the form of a gelatinous crustacean. Though not mute, this subcellular intelligence retained its former talents for communication on the non-audial spectrum. This was preferable to the Prima Queen, who, though immortal, was not immune to the vicissitudes of time, and had lost significant portions of her hearing in the ensuing centuries. The Prima Queen had also become demented from time to time, misinterpreting hallucinations as portents. Fear of the wrath of the Matea Lord and their emissaries plagued her dreaming mind with terrible nightmares. But their wait would soon be over, for the portal had resolved itself into the quarry for which it was built. A letter. Dear Mr. Crispy, you enter the parking lot at 12:30 p.m., the height of lunch hour, and are surprised to find only a dozen or so cars in the lot. Accounting for staff, you presume the Dizzy's is not well populated. You park, and there, sitting on a bench by the front door, is a man, maybe in his late 40s. He is wearing a jacket he has probably owned since the 1990s, dark blue with the trim of a popular sports team in the region. He is smoking a cigarette and looks hollowed out, grim, as though he hasn't laughed since he was a child. You enter the restaurant, and the groan of the hinge creates a droning subtone to the din of screaming children. You wait for the host to seat you, and you look around. Most large tables seem to be taken up with families of at least 4 children. One has a party hat tilted on their not-quite-round head. That one looks unhappy. The rest are either swirling food on their plates or throwing food across the table. This is Dizzy's. The host, who looks as though they haven't slept in 4 days, grabs you a menu and takes you to a booth. You aren't right next to the family who brought 3 children under the age of 4, but you sure can hear them caterwauling to beat the band. And the band that is playing is, of course, Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band. Hollywood Nights, Down on Main Street, Kathmandu, all of his hits seem to be on repeat. The tension headache begins at your temples, and a rotund waiter comes with water. You order what appears to be the most benign thing on the menu, a burger and fries. The waiter slouches away to get you your soda. Meanwhile, the children are on the move, yelling as though possessed by demons. The parents, harried and exhausted, peel themselves off the linoleum chairs to chase them down. It is then you realize that Dizzy's has always been and always will be. Every child who is brought to Dizzy's is thus condemned to either always eat at Dizzy's or will work for Dizzy's. You can see it in the dead eyes of the waitstaff. All pretense of service has been obliterated to the bare minimum. The floors gather dust in the corners. A severe woman in her 30s, perhaps the shift manager, also holds her temples from the headache. A customer takes their bill to the counter to pay and has left their purse in the car. We don't see them again, and the shift manager heavily sighs and writes off another loss. Your burger and fries arrive, all saturated with the flavor of despair and suffering. But what are you going to do? You're going to eat every disappointing drop of that burger and fries, buddy. That's what you're going to do. You're going to drown that burger in ketchup so all you can taste is the sweet mush in your mouth. You're going to drink 2 more glasses of Coke to wash it down, and then every soft, salty plank of the French fries will also go right down your gullet. All of this to the tune of Down on Main Street and Night Moves, and the cries of a child that doesn't want the green lump of vegetables that is on their plate. The meal sits heavy in your gut, and digestive sounds rumble and escape via belches which taste almost rotten on your tongue. Now on your face is the same blank and depressed look of ennui that is on the face of every adult in the restaurant, staff, cooks, diners. The waiter asks if you want anything else. You sigh and say, "No, just the check, please." You get up, leaving a crinkled sawbuck on the table as a tip, and step on the sticky floors to the station. A cadaverous old man with a fake grin plastered on his face asks how everything was. "Just fine," you say. "That's what we like to hear," he exclaims with glee as he runs your credit card. "Oh, declined," he says, grin getting wider. "I don't have any cash on me," you say. "Don't worry, you can work it off in the back." He points with yellowed tobacco fingers towards the kitchen. Your shoulders slump, resigned to your fate, and you're still there now, washing dishes at Dizzy's 9 years later, wondering in your more lucid moments where the time went, but most of the time floating in the malaise that is the Dizzy's verse. Unsigned. Dear Reader, your letter has been forwarded to the culinary investigators of the FBI for review. It is alarming to read about this establishment, which bears a very close resemblance to another national chain restaurant, one which Mrs. Crispy and I visit often. We are rarely disappointed by their offerings. Ovum scrambled to runny perfection, flapjacks drenched in sweet syrups, glasses filled, and refilled again with the nectar of exotic citrus fruits. My mouth waters thinking about these even now. This national chain restaurant, which I shall not name, also has strict policies on pre-adult diners. One emission of more than 40 decibels from a recalcitrant youth is met with swift and severe justice involving the loss of a digit or two. Many a parent has regretted the crippling visited upon such naughty children as a result of their offense. Also, between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, appetizers are half off. And now, from old Wyethscope's quarterly concern, Zodiac Oracles. Electric flies. Who are the light-bearers? They crawl in shadows, cloaked in a gauzy muslin, stone floors creaking under their weight. They cry for supplication and succor, their names Ingot, Jape, and others known and unknown. More terrible is she who must not be permitted egress to this territory, this plane. She is destruction incarnate, and foul sow determined to prevent the great work. She is the enemy, and she must not succeed. Who are the light-bearers? Those obligated by oath and creed to that ancient light-bringer invite your communion with him. He who has been variously referred to as Phosphorus, Hiosphoros, Hellel, Venus, and another, unspoken, unspeakable, powerful name of some infamy. Artaxerxes II, Nabonidus, Tiglath-Pileser, Sargon, and Sennacherib, great kings of old, were said to have been among his bondservants. His return to the seat of terrestrial power has been foretold even by adversaries since being deposed more than 20 centuries ago. "Who are the light-bearers?" A query shouted by raw throats, hoarse from wailing. They will be revealed soon, soon enough, but will you recognize them, sitting in dark ignorance? Zype. Descending down from the heavens on stairs of hail, Horvia steps waving a scepter of smoking topaz. Their beauty overwhelms the crickets, cockroaches, and crabs who immediately perish and dissolve in their wake. With every dread step, plant life responds with manic propagation, metastasizing the landscape into a patchwork quilt of awful beauty. They part their lips and exhale a whistle that summons their familiar, myself, Zype, from the folded seventh dimension. My emergence from the occulted space pocket shocks life that bears witness to it. Atomic-level panic ensues, protons bursting with microfungal sense organs. The hailstones cover the ground, a milky mist rising from them as Horvia continues to move across the face of the water, the expanses of blighted land. Terror dreams haunt the sentient minds of the sane in their waking hours, and offerings are made. Horvia and myself lay straddling one another, mating in full view of thousands who cheer us on. The quaking climax of our coupling brings tears of blood to the eyes of the simian disciples. Bellies swelling against rational thought, in moments our spawn cries as they emerge in their first form, writhing mouths and skittering limbs. None are sane now as the adherents dash their pink heads against the jutting rocks. Ashy black smoke curls from their skulls. The spawn inhale it, sated. A decade passes, spawn metamorphosizing into the second form, four-limbed things with a gray fur and cyclopean eye. Horvia and I have coupled dozens of times in the ensuing years, but we have slowed down. Horvia calls me to one of the remaining oceans that has not boiled away. We stand in grass that has grown blue and tall, peering into the still green waters. Reflected in them are blooming red galaxies of the heavens, our goddesses riding meteors to see the new home we have made for them in their image.
Hurtling across the steppe, the Glaful clan trailed Hunblood over miles.
And now, Fiction Corner. Your ride will arrive shortly, read the message on my phone, along with the avatar of Toby, my Lyft driver, and the type of car, a Toyota Camry. My senses were dulled by the Manhattans, old-fashions, and toddies I had imbibed over the course of the past few hours. The rest of the group, Mike, Matt, and Nick, had already either gotten cabs or were otherwise straight enough to drive. Me, though, I enjoy getting a buzz on, especially when I don't have to get up early the following morning for work. And soon I saw the sick, yellowish lights of the Camry slice through the mist. It's fair to say the Camry ambled up to the curb, and I heard the soft click of the back door being unlocked. The streetlights fell strangely on the interior, as Toby appeared to be in silhouette, no features revealed. "Welcome, Keith," Toby said, sounding congested. I put on my seatbelt and Tony pulled out into the street. I looked at the placard on the divider, and I was struck by what it said. Your Lyft driver, Toby, asks the following. If you are going to be sick, please do not puke in the back seat. No sex of any kind in the back seat, or you will be asked to leave. You may have 1 bottle of water, no more. Please leave a tip in the app if you are satisfied with your ride. Strength privet early frostbrook in Norfolk State Hoff Hoxie I didn't understand the last line, and what was striking was that the letters seemed to shift and moray into other fonts and characters, even at one point numerals. I figured that I was just seeing things and started to close my eyes. The sounds of downtown traffic and the road under the Camry's tires made for a lulling rhythm. I didn't entirely lose consciousness, though, thanks to the music Toby was listening to in the front. While I don't choose to listen to popular music, I generally don't find anything wrong with it on the surface. This music, though, was definitely peculiar and could not have been popular. There was a beat suggestive of club music, but the melody seemed to be played by bagpipes. A string quartet out of tune made occasional stabs at clustered notes. The singer sounded like he was recorded or being played back at the wrong speed, like a hollering bluesman of the Delta combined with the more vitriolic hysterics of a Pavarotti or Bocelli. As we pulled out of the city limits, it appeared we were hitting several potholes. The car bounced, and the squeaks of the springs led odd punctuations to the strange music. "Aye, the Belky are rising," muttered Toby, still sounding like he needed to clear his throat. "Excuse me," I said, as the car jolted and I hit my head on the ceiling. "Ow," I added. "Ow is right, and only the start," Toby added, cryptically chuckling. It now felt as though we were driving over cobblestone, and it was at this point I wondered where Toby was taking me. Are you sure you're on the right route to take me back to Lakeview Lane?" I said. "Oh, don't worry, Keith. You'll get to where you're going soon enough. To the Belky," Toby said, coughing, his speech seeming almost doubled. I didn't know what or where Belky was, but I began to get nervous. Ahead, the view was almost completely obscured by the thickening fog. I looked behind me out the rear window and was alarmed by what appeared to be 1,000 menacing points of light glowing in the gloom and seeming to approach. "Ah, mrtvi Belky podnesemaya!" Toby cried out, and I could feel the car lurch to the passenger side. Toby lost control of the car, and we went off into a ditch. I heard a crunch as the hood of the car crumpled, and I momentarily blacked out. Toby's face rose in front of mine, his beard a writhing mass of tapeworms. "You know, Keith, you knew, and now the Belky will take their," he whispered, then began expectorating. I stared in horror as out of Toby's mouth fell dozens of tarantulas. Then his throat seemed to swell, and something fuzzy and black emerged. Toby's body shuddered and collapsed on itself as though it were an empty balloon, and a hideous and huge woolly caterpillar shivered free from Toby's maw, which had unhinged itself and flopped onto his chest. Toby's eyes fell back into his skull, and his teeth blinked at me like baby doll eyes, as the caterpillar skittered along the ground, moving by the motion of its dozens of chomping mouths. As it crawled away, it continued to grow, expanding to the size of a small bus. The mouths screamed hunger and anger at having been brought into existence. Out of the blackness, for I must have passed out again from the shock, I heard a high creaking. I had assumed that I must have hallucinated the business with Toby and the caterpillar. In part, I must have, though when I craned my head around to look in the front seat, there was only a pile of green ooze with something like bits of pasta floating in it. With the triumvirate voices of Mike, Matt, and Nick, it cried out at me, "It's too late, baby! Now it's too late!" in an atonal, not quite barbershop version of the Carole King classic. I couldn't catch my breath and struggled to release the seatbelt. It smelled like burning metal and rubber, and I could hear the rear tire scrape against the bit of fender that must have come loose in the crash. I finally made my way out of the car when I again saw those malevolent eyes glittering in the dark and moving closer to me. I looked down, and the road was covered in squirrel skulls. There had to be thousands of them, and they seemed to be rising like an ocean. I felt panic and acid rise in my chest, and I made my way out of the ditch. Ahead, one of the sets of eyes grew a face, something between a rodent and a coyote with mange. Its eyes rolled madly in its head, and its mouth hung open, a sore-covered tongue dripping viscous drool. It bared its fangs and hissed like an angry cat whose tail was just stepped on. At that horrible sound, my stupor snapped and I began to run. As I ran, the sound of the pack of animals behind me rose from a pitter-patter to a crashing gallop. Along with this, my footfalls cracked the hundreds of squirrel skulls that were at the road, sending splinters of bone flying as a rumbling commenced. The ground shook and I fell, skulls scattering as the rabid pack of whatever the hell they were ran around and over me. I felt their claws dig into my back, and I heard a sizzle and pop as a drop of rabid foam fell beside me. I rolled away, seeing not only the rat-coyote things, but also large panthers constructed of crystal, their footfalls sounding like the crashing of 100 chandeliers. Fortunately, it seemed as though they had other interests than me. The air smelled like a waste treatment plant, and I could see downtown in the distance burning with a green flame. The screams of the dying carried through the night, a diabolical chorus accompanying the conflagration. Against the light, a large figure lumbered. It had a round head and a half a dozen arms. It turned, and I sensed its awareness fall on me. A scream louder than a jet engine caused my eardrums to burst, and I could feel blood trickling out of my ear and down my cheek. I tried to get to my feet as the behemoth lurched ahead, the ground shaking with its every step. The street lights along its approach were extinguished one by one, and power lines fell and crackled a dangerous strobing blue. From the lights, I could see the squirrel skulls rising like a parting sea. They quaked and adhered themselves to the monstrosity that now stood 10 feet before me and 30 feet above me. While the head was shrouded in the fog, which flashed with ominous red light, the body was armored in thousands of laughing squirrel skulls, which also spoke with the voices of my friends. They maniacally cackled as one, as though through a muddy throat not used to speech.
Krivietzechku bilit jego boga I unichach dushu etego kriazongo kaik velkoi slave,
which I heard rattling through my bones and within my quickly maddening brain. I felt my legs being ripped like paper from my hips, and saw my blood with fading eyes steam and stream over the still rising tide of skulls. From above me, the awful head of the abomination peered down, dark black orbs gazing into my own. I screamed and gibbered as a clawed paw sliced at my torso and picked at my innards. My head fell to the side, where between the bone, out of the pool of my various fluids, a light pink mist hovered over it. It sparkled, and growing from the ground as though through time-lapse, a brilliant carnation of all the colors of the rainbow blossomed and bloomed into awful radiance and glory. It smelled of salvation, and a single tear fell from my eye before it boiled and burst in my skull. The Magnetized Corpse by Jules Janin. With regard to good stories, here is one that was told to me by a trustworthy man who claimed to be the friend of an eyewitness who played a significant role in the drama I am about to relate to you briefly, not without making the ardent wish that the story in question might be honored before long by an adaptation for the theater, which is, as everyone knows, the greatest honor that can be desired nowadays. Not 6 weeks ago, a young Englishman named Belfort was dying, quite simply from a bad chest and a few crazy years recklessly spent. The young man, although he was nearing the end, did not regret losing his life too much, for he had had his fair share of amours, duels, bad debts, picnics, and even fine sermons. In short, his fair share of all the Parisian joys. One of his friends, a man of science but a good enough fellow regardless, seeing that Charles Belfort would soon render his last breath, came to say to him in his softest voice, "If it wouldn't displease you too much, my dear invalid, I'll use my abilities to magnetize you, and I'll choose the moment when you render up your soul. It seems to me that it will be a fine experiment, and that there's nothing about it likely to displease you. What do you say?" "Not only doesn't your experiment displease me," the other replied, "but it seems to me very amusing and interesting, and I thank you for having thought of me for the proof, which will be decisive. Count on me, my dear doctor. You'll be content with my patience, I hope, and I'll be sure to let you know when the moment comes." With those words, the two friends shook hands and separated, saying that they would see one another again soon. They were both full of hope, and it would have been difficult to decide which of the two was the more content, the moribund or the magnetizer. 2 days went by, 2 centuries, while the magnetizer waited impatiently for the final agony, which did not seem to want to arrive for good and all. The dying man, for his part, lost patience, and he said to his friend, "Damn it, my dear chap, it's not my fault if death is treating me with such ill will, but what consoles me is that you won't lose anything by waiting, and I'll be a magnificent subject." On the night following this conversation, the sick man had a final crisis and fell into a comatose ecstasy. He started sketching fantastic spider-webs with his finger, and yet, in the midst of the most abominable grimaces, he still had the presence of mind to say to his comrade, "You might have to lift my head to hide the light that is hurting my eyes." The other obeyed. He propped his moribund up in a sitting position, took away every importunate light, and set about the operation, which is to say that never, absolutely never, had such beautiful passes and counterpasses, the whole customary apparatus, in short, been performed. The magnetizer was in the swim, but in the end, when he had enveloped the moribund, who lent himself to it with exemplary willingness, with his all-powerful fluid, and saw that his subject had arrived at magnetic perfection, the magnetizer started to interrogate him. "How are you doing, Belfort? Where are you?" "My dear friend," the other said, "I'm just dying. You've caught me just at the moment when the breath was leaving my body, and now it depends entirely on you to let me finish the job or to keep me here, suspended between being and non-being, which doesn't seem to me to be a disagreeable state so far." "Let's wait," said the magnetizer. "There's no hurry, Belfort, my friend." And with that the magnetizer went to dinner, without taking the trouble to demagnetize his friend. The next day the maker of magnetism reappeared in the mortuary chamber. Everything was in its place, including the cadaver. "Belfort," said the scientist, after a few preliminary passes, "what have you been doing since you died?" "In truth, my dear chap," the dead man replied, "I've been obliged to follow you everywhere you went." And with that the dead man told the living one everything that the latter had done the day before. He had dined in a cheap eatery, and from there he had gone to stand on the steps of the Café de Paris. He had been given a ticket to the vaudeville, and he had seen some young women who were pretty enough, but some of whom sang out of tune. Finally he had gone back home and read a little of a novel that he had picked up on the way. "And if you'll permit me to make an observation," the dead man said, "so long as I'm attached to you by a thread that only you can break, eat better, I beg you, remembering that I'm sharing the experience. You know that I like music, so don't expose me to hearing quavering voices that would spoil the most beautiful faces. All alone here, I'm getting bored, and I wouldn't be sorry if you were to read a good novel from time to time, but at least, for pity's sake, read it all the way through. Finally, if you please, don't go to bed so late. I become irritated not sleeping, because for 24 hours I ought to have been sleeping eternally." With these words the man slumped back, and the magnetizer left the room, slightly discomfited by the strange spy that was dogging his heels. The next day the living man came back, and found the dead man a trifle numb. He warmed him up with a further dose of magnetic fluid, rendering him, if not live, at least a little color and the ability to speak. "Ah," said the dead man, raising himself up, "you're not showing me any charity. What? You go to see such hideous sick people, and I have to hear them coughing, spitting, howling, moaning, and all the rest. In the street you follow a horrible woman reeking of musk, a woman in old shoes and a dirty skirt, and I have to keep you company counting the holes and the stains of the filthy creature. Then you go to meet up with some young people, and you tell them about your good luck. You make the street walker into a duchess, and a cotton apron into a silk skirt. When you're dead, you know, lying makes you feel ill. And what makes you feel even worse when you're dead is stupidity. Some quip that would have made me laugh when I was of this world appears to me to be utter nonsense now that I can hear your mind with the ears of my own. So try to talk better, my dear chap, and if it's all the same to you, I'd be obliged if you didn't get drunk on adulterated wine. My throat's been torn apart by the alcohol you've swallowed. Who do you think pulled a face? It was the living man, who was beginning to think that his dead man was damnable hard to please, because, after all, the previous evening's indulgence hadn't been deserving of such scorn. As for the lady with the worn-out shoes, the living man hadn't noticed the shoe, but only the foot and a little bit of the leg. However, he was fond to his dead man, and he resolved to keep a better eye on himself, in order not to give poor Belfort further reason for discontentment. When he came back 2 days later, he found the deceased in a state of incredible excitement. The dead man was sweating copiously with indignation legible on his distressed face. First of all, the magnetizer set about trying to calm that anger. He blew his most soothing breath upon those irritated nerves, and appeased that motionless and frozen heart as best he could, which beat in memory. "What is it, Master Belfort? Who's upset you? And for God's sake, what's the matter with you?" "What's the matter with me?" replied the cadaver after a long pause. "What's the matter with me, imbecile that you are? A curse upon the brazen threads that attach me to a fool like you. What's the matter with me? But, my dear chap, for 2 days you've been going from one stupidity to another. The day before yesterday, it's true, you were well groomed and well dressed, but you'd fastened your belt too tight, and I nearly choked. Your boots, or rather our boots, were well polished, but they were too small, and if I could still walk, I'm sure that I'd be limping with my right foot. I've nothing to say about the lovely salon to which you took me. It was pleasant and it was calm. The clothes weren't at all garish. The mature ladies kept to their place, leaving the foreground to the young women. No one played the slightest sonata or read the slightest sonnet. People only spoke in even voices, neither too loud nor too quiet, and said the nicest things. Trivial, but light. Benevolent and sonorous. In brief, had it not been for your belt and our footwear, I would have blessed you for having taken me to such a beautiful place. But good heavens, could you have been any more gauche, maladroit, and absurd? In a corner of the little room to the left, a more beautiful woman than I ever saw with my mortal eyes was sitting. By dint of attention and willpower, via your terrestrial intermediation, I had attracted the benevolent interest of that amiable lady. Already she was looking at me with a certain tenderness, and she was about to smile at me. Our two souls were no longer any but one, and we were about to fall in love, when you turned your head like an idiot to greet I don't know what starchy spirit. Then the image of my beautiful lady fled, and if you live for 100 years, you won't find either another face as beautiful or another heart as noble. Idiot that you are, having done that, what do you do next? You know that I've left some glaring debts, and that I don't even have a tomb. You haven't a sou yourself. You live from hand to mouth. Your rent hasn't been paid and never will be. In brief, you're as poor as a poet and an actor rolled into one, which is to say, abominably poor. Well, you sit down at a card table, tremulously risk a wretched pistol, and, having won the hand, you pocket the money and run away like a thief. Now, do you know what you did there, Monsieur Idiot? You renounced getting your hands on a round sum of 4 lovely thousand louis d'or, and you'd have won the next 13 hands, my son. With your 4,000 louis, you'd have had a carriage, and I'd have had a first-class funeral. You'd have had a new suit, and I'd have had an embroidered shroud. You'd have gone to seek your supper in the chorus of the opera, and I'd have gone to look for Monsieur Ganal. Damn your feeble intelligence. You can't make use of what little sense you have, but you amuse yourself dragging another man's intelligence around with you. Go away. You make me sick, wretched living individual that you are. When our magnetizer finally understood that whatever he did would surely attract criticism or sarcasm, he fell silent. Now that he felt that he was being followed and observed at close range by some invisible entity that he had retained on the boundary between the two worlds, the scientist dare not take a step in the street. He scarcely dared answer yes or no to the simplest questions that were addressed to him. It was as if he were deaf and dumb. At times he wondered whether he might be the magnetized man and the magnetizer that great motionless but not speechless cadaver, the mere sight of which had ended up making him shiver. An idea, a thought, is such a powerful thing, even independent of life. An idea pursues you, obsesses you, more tenacious than a shadow, as eloquent as remorse or hope, full of starts, excitations, and perils. However, our man went back to his friend Belfort 3 days later. This time, once again, a great change was evident in his inanimate face. Pure and simple scorn had replaced indignation and anger. The half-closed eyes seemed to be saying, "Away with you." The tight lips were expressing an indescribable disdain. Every muscle, taut from top to bottom, held a contempt suspended from every thread connecting it to the soul. "What's the matter now, my friend?" cried the living man. "You seem dazed. You can't say this time that I've done or said anything stupid, because I've stayed at home, alone, entirely given over to my thoughts." "Oh, my dear fellow," the dead man said, "it's the contemplation of your thoughts that's giving me nausea. Motionless as you were, I was forced to look into the depths of that chaos you call your soul. But what kind of animal are you to occupy yourself with so many ignoble, frivolous, and shameful things? When I was alive and I called you my friend, everyone said that you were a gallant fellow. You had a reputation for keen, even eloquent wit. You were credited with philosophy, probity, and tact. For 3 days, unable to help it, I've been watching you very attentively. But, my dear fellow, you're a complete mess. What you know poorly. What you don't know you replace with words as empty as your head. Your generosity is a certain organic weakness that ends up making your eyes red, and that's all. Your intelligence is represented by a few mechanical cogwheels that rotate of their own accord like the wheel of a watermill, incessantly repeating the same tick-tock. Your courage, I've seen all the way its depths, your courage, is a cardboard mask that frightens children. Your probity, let's talk about your probity, is written in the margins of the commercial code and the penal code. Shame upon your vices, those of a badly brought-up child. I wouldn't give 4 sous for your vices. They make me sick, your wicked, shameful vices. They're like a kind of boasting. As for your virtues, they're so worthless I wouldn't even give them to my lackeys. There's something limp and vain about your virtue, which bears some resemblance to a badly cooked broth. Oh, I advise you not to lay bare the inside of your brain and your heart. It's not a pretty sight, although, on the other hand, it's very sad. And what ideas you have about other men. What thwarted ambitions. And I don't envy your work at all, my poor sir. What? You aren't ashamed even of your castles in Spain, when you amuse yourself rambling on for entire hours in petty daydreams? Anyway, monsieur, let's leave it at that. But I'm damnably sorry that I ever called you my friend. It would not have taken much on this occasion for the magnetizer to destroy his work and liberate himself from the unwelcome thought that was obsessing him. He left the mortuary chamber in a very bad mood, and on the way home he said to himself that it was, after all, quite an accomplishment to have stopped Belfort's discontented soul halfway. Then again, the living man said to himself sadly, what good has it done me to have retained that dead man in the edge of his grave? To have myself told such rude home truths, to hear the story of my everyday life told in such a cruel and grotesque fashion, no longer to be alone with my conscience, my thoughts, my ambitions, myself? If the clairvoyant that sees everything were, at least, to indicate some unknown science to me, a remedy for the gout or some hidden treasure easy to extract, I'd be rewarded for my troubles. But no, for having carried out the most difficult task, the most excellent miracle that magnetism has ever accomplished, here I am dragging behind me a bilious inquisitor who isn't content with anything and who'll end up making me disgusted with myself. Thus, the clever man reasoned. He was very annoyed, and firmly resolved to put an end to his dealings with such a miscreant, no matter what the cost. As he was unable to sleep, The magnetizer went back to Belfort's house the same evening at midnight. Belfort watched him come in, and without waiting to be interrogated, for the magnetic fluid becomes, it seems, a habit, and replaces life as a well-lit candle replaces with winter sun, the dead man cried, "I'll tell you what you've just done, amiable doctor. You've quite simply decided to murder me. Yes, you're jealous of this artificial life, you're furious at my revelations, and you've decided to extract me abruptly from magnetic sleep in order to return me to dust and silence. That's handsome of you, Monsieur. It's glorious. What you're doing, coming to murder a dead man, coming to trouble a cadaver in his coffin, attacking the thought of a man because the man, having become, thanks to you, a part of eternal life, is no longer able and no longer wants to flatter you. Well, get on with it then, and turn me to dust. But that dust, when you've cast it to the wind, will summon to its aid another, bolder thought, to follow in your tracks. Another gaze, even more clairvoyant, to read the depths of your soul. Another avenger, even more implacable. Remorse. At these threats the magnetizer fled, but in his distress he left the door ajar. The neighbors of both sexes, who had initially kept their distance, took the chance one after another, and finally all together, of coming to greet and interrogate the dead man, and picked up here and there some of those fine verities, I mean a few of those eternal, ever-living truths that only the dead know how to voice appropriately. Husbands, wives, children, tenants, owners, masters and servants, the rich and the poor, all the way to the porter, each obtained a parcel of justice addressed to them. The dead man spoke true words and expressed true notions, and what he said was admittedly cruel. If you asked him where fortune lay, he would point out a wart on the end of your nose. If you mentioned ambition to him, he would talk to you about modesty, economy, and bonhomie. The female neighbors found him so ungallant that they slammed the door violently. That was all the late Monsieur Belfort wanted. A week went by without the magnetized and the magnetizer seeing one another again. They were sulking, but it was obviously not up to the dead man to make the first move. The scientist finally understood that and came back to his subject's bedside. "I've thought about everything that has happened," Belfort said to him, "and I'd be glad if you were to carry through the plan you made the other day. You're right. Wake me up so that I can finish dying quietly. It had made such a good beginning when you came along to disrupt it, that I'd already be devoured by worms and returned via the 1,000 pores of universal decomposition into the ocean of life and light. Wake me up then, and I'll die entirely, and joyfully, for this time I'll amuse myself by gazing, not at your soul, which isn't beautiful, but at your body, which is very ugly. Only the other day I caught you in that agreeable occupation. You were telling yourself how fortunate you were before. But please, where are these women who can look lovingly at an ape like you? You're badly formed. You always have one shoulder higher than the other, this one over that one, or that one over this one. Your hair started falling out a long time ago, and what's left is hanging on to rotten roots, like last year's thatch after the winter. Your eyes can still see, but I can see some sort of pellicle extending over your line of sight that doesn't augur anything good. Oh, if you could see those layers of yellow chalk encrusted in the joints of your fingers, which are corrupting your bones and are going to break them bit by bit, like the boot of torture, but more slowly, more insidiously, and with a more obstinate verve. Your heart is swollen, my dear chap, and the point is being torn by some viscera or other that is wounded in its turn. Your left lung isn't much better than my right lung. Gradually infiltrating between your skin and your softened tendons, I can see layers of thick fat, which makes you resemble some sort of sea cow. Your teeth are already turning yellow. They're loose in their bloody cavities. In your brain, I can see veins swollen with apoplectic blood, ready to burst. You're doomed, you see, and, give me your hand, you're dead." On hearing those lugubrious words, the magnetizer begs the magnetized for pity, mercy, and forgiveness. And in order to free himself from the vision that is obsessing him, to expel from his mind that voice which is pursuing him with such bruising stubbornness, in order not to remain exposed to that mockery and those prophecies of misfortune, the magnetizer sets about countermanding the magnetic fluid and destroying that artificial life. The dead man resists, but in vain. It is necessary that a corpse which is dead should yield to a man who is still alive. Gradually, the voice fades away. It utters one last gasp, and then Belfort, so eloquent a little while before, is no longer more than I don't know what, that which I don't know how to name in any language. It was, in fact, for 3 weeks already that death had possession of the cadaver, and now the magnetic breath had ceased. Corruption and the worm took hold of their prey again, and did not let go. One shivers at the mere idea that the magnetizer might have died before having demagnetized his friend Belfort. How long eternity would have seemed to the latter then, unless his thought, obedient all the way to the abyss or to heaven, had followed the soul of the magnetizer. That would be another trial to attempt. And now from Old Wyethscope's Quarterly Concern, dates of import. January 19th, Sin Feast. In the community of Hewstone in the mountains of Washington, a tight-knit and tight-lipped community of societal outcasts gather on January the 19th for what is referred to as the Sin Feast. During the Sin Feast, which occurs between sundown and sunrise on the day, a long table is set in the middle of the village. On the table is placed a basin, stocks, and steel cuffs affixed with spikes. Through the casting of ballots, the community minister leads half a dozen of the community's most despised residents to the stocks, where they are then secured by the shackles. Their head is placed over the basin, and then the mayor, with a ceremonial straight-razor in hand, makes a gruesome and killing smile about their neck. Along with the gouts of blood, floating in the basins would be spherical objects, obsidian in color and with the texture of stiff gelatin. These objects, which the residents believe to be sin incarnate, would be fished out by the youths and taken to the feast pyre. The sins simmer in a ewe broth, trembling as they boil, stick-like limbs unfolding from within like steamed crustaceans. When all 14 of the limbs are exposed, they are considered done and placed in wooden bowls and passed among the population. And now, from Old Wyethscope's Quarterly Concern, newsworthy items of interest from around the region. Tomb of Pharaoh Het discovered in Newfoundland. Archaeologists in the remote forests of Newfoundland have claimed to discover the tomb of dread Pharaoh Het last Thursday. Dean Rower of Long College, Berkshire, writes that the tomb was found miles within the centuries-old trees, in the form of a wooden shack. The team was puzzled by the strange hieroglyphs burnt into the porch of the shack, carbon dating confirming the age to be 4,000 to 5,000 years old. Chris Elke, professor of Egyptology, went pale as he translated the hieroglyphics. Sweating, he reports that they claim that the age of Het is nigh, and will last for 10,000 years, hastened by the doomful toots of King Charles on an alabaster saxophone. Later, under psychiatric care, Christopher revealed that he was touched by dreams of large populations engulfed by spontaneous combustion, and hordes of ancient tasters who ate plate after plate of strange fruits, vegetables, and damnable fungi, for Het has no tongue, before fading away. The team was then chased away by a long john-wearing hermit who waved a fireplace poker while yelling at them to get off his ding-dang property. And now, trivia and facts. Impress your friends and family with these true nuggets of knowledge. Eccentric millionaire Jonathan Price, former barrister and sole resident of Hufflock, has the world's largest collection of dinner saucers. They are housed in a hermetically sealed bunker on the Price estate, and new additions are added weekly via a complex system of tubes and pulleys. It is estimated the collection weighs 5 million tons and is responsible for a recent tilt of the Earth's axis on 2 degrees. Babies and small pets are not permitted within a 50-kilometer radius of the estate, for they are unable to resist its gravitational pull. Persons born between 1922 and 1929 were the subjects of a government project that involved hairy jungle snails being injected into the pancreas upon birth. The experiment was a rousing success. If Grandpappy acts ornery, smells funny, or appears especially lumpy, this explains it.
Moss found growing among rocks on the eastern shores of Ireland has been shown to be as intelligent as the average American toddler.
And now, sound words to live by, wisdom, advice, and prognostications from Old Wyethscope's Quarterly Concern. Turn off the lights when you leave, but never look back. Bishop to Knight 5. Check. Take care that the socks you wear are your own, and not those of a hirsute interloper.
It is truly too late now.
Listen to what the possum head outside of Dizzy's tells you. It does not lie.
Under the tundra of Siberia, approximately 69 degrees latitude and 88 degrees longitude, Harry S. Truman buried a treasure in 1957 of blood diamonds, bile emeralds, vitreous rubies, and assorted precious metals. The exact location of the treasure will be unsealed in the year 2045. Lead, as a result, will become the world's primary form of currency.
And now I bid you a restless night.
May you cower in the corner until morning's light. And in the harsh daylight you will see no one really gets out of jail free.
Thank you for listening to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was written, produced, edited, and uploaded by Matt Henshaw, except as indicated.